Hello everybody interested in Seidr, the old Norse tradition of shamanism. Welcome to this first of 8 video lectures in the program that I call Seidr, History, Craft and Modern Practice. I am Annette and part of Scandinavian Center for Shamanic Studies. And I have made this program for you, both you who are, should we say, interested in getting looking at the sources and all the research about the Seidr tradition, a more critical discussion, a more detailed view, and also for you who are interested in, or maybe already have started, a modern practicing of the shamanic method of Seidr. And also for you who are just interested in everything Viking, so to speak. I welcome you all, and I think there should be a lot of good stuff for all of you. The video lectures will be available for all, and for each lecture there will be a Zoom question and answer meeting that relates to that topic. And the question and answering will be both about, should we say, details, questions to what I tell about of history or sources, and also a part of it will be questions and tips and tricks for your own practice. Yeah. So today's topic, or today's title, I've called it Magic in Norse Tradition. Because Seidr is not just should we say, a free-flowing thing or something you could look at as an isolated method or tradition. Of course, it is embedded in a whole cultural, spiritual, magic landscape, and also have both roots, way down in history. And so for our understanding, for our exploration of Seid, it's good first to see it in its context. So today, our first video here is, I hope will give you an overview and also present some of the more basic concepts and ideas that I will be using and the angle I'm going to be teaching from in this. One thing when people talk about Seidr is some people present it, and that's both practitioners and researchers, some present it as should we say, a generic term for all Norse magic. And some, and that's me among others, look at it as a more specific term that has its own ritual structure, its own way of dealing with power and spirits, and of course connected to all other shamanic and magic traditions, especially in the Nordic area, but having its own specific traits. And let's try to look at Seid now, the way it is situated amongst the other kinds of magic in Norse tradition. I think first you should know a little about how I have arrived to use this angle, my viewpoint, my way of working and researching and practicing Seidr. And it maybe some of you can recognize part of this story from your own personal history. Anyway, when I first, many years ago, started learning about shamanism, everything we heard of and all the sources available that I knew of then came from either Siberian cultures Norse or Southern American cultures. And it really, really kindled in me a longing for, almost a hunger for what was here, what kind of, there must be a shamanic, a magic tradition that grew out of from these landscapes, this Nordic land that I live in, that I grew out of. And so I first, and then I heard about Seidr, very sort of sporadically, but starting to investigate everything I could back then about that sort of spread, so that all of, should we say, older magic traditions of the North European, mostly the Nordic countries, have been like something I have explored and researched and taught about. And it's in that perspective, if we go way back to Bronze Age in Little Denmark, and then look at how the tradition is evolving, and methods come, methods go, and the status of those who are performing it, practicing it, and using it for both healing and divination and everything, how that rises and falls, and how also the whole tradition has to adapt when a new worldview and a new religion, new kinds of politics comes in over the area. And so it's sort of this digging and comparing that I have been doing that leads to that I do see Seid as one kind of Norse magic, but that not all Norse magic is Seidr. This is in fact one thing I'm going to look at now, because I want to give you this overview of how a site is settled within the other traditions, the other methods and tools. But first, we should also know that some researchers, some practitioners, and even in some of the very older sources, you will see Seidr used as a generic term for all magic. And I am one of those who lean towards seeing Seid as a specific method or a specific tradition within the traditions that has its own traits, and they are the ones that we will explore in this series, because Seid is the focus, but we need, in order to work with it and understand it, we also have to look at what it is embedded in. In the late Iron Age and through Viking Age up into medieval times, there are these different 4 or 5 branches of magic in the Norse tradition that are widely known. And here I have spelled it out for you. There is Galdr, that is a method or a tradition, a way of song spells, and I'll get back to that. And then we have the runes that you probably have heard about, and they're much more than a divination system. Then there is Seidr, that's like our focus. And then we have utisita, that is a tradition for like a vision quest, so to speak, to sitting out for wisdom. We will also get back to this. And Gand can mean different kinds of other magic. Sometimes that's also used as a generic term for all magic. But I think you have heard about to be elf shot, and so you can also be Gand shot. It's more or less the same, something about magic. They are operating within the same area, cultural area, and with a pretty long lifespan, and of course changing. But there is one of them is utisita, is standing out from the others in two aspects. And one is that vision questing is known all over the world. Throughout all humanity's history, there are different ways of going out and being totally on your own in the great mystery in nature. And often it requires both fasting and waking. Some cultures claim that to do it really properly, it has to be 4 days and 4 nights. And others here in Seidr, it's mostly agreed that it's from sunset to sunrise. And I would just say that every, should we say, spot on the earth, then it will always be local agreements and pacts between the spirits and all kinds of beings of nature and the human beings as how that vision questing should be done, so that it's according to, should we say, the rules, the agreement between all species. And so the Seidr has this form here. Uti means out or outside, and it means outside the fence, outside the fence of community. So in fact, it's not so much sitting out, it's sitting in the wilderness. But it's a rather modest name, really, Seidr. We will also see traces of Seidr that's mixed in with the practice of Seidr. I should also say that Seidr is that one branch of these that is maybe also some forms of Gand, that is for lay people. It's for everybody. Everybody will have different reasons for doing an Seidr. And it could be to get the gift of poetry. It could be to get the wisdom and strength for your next coming year. So it has it's both been ordinary people and the skilled, the trained side people, Galdr, men and women, and rune specialists and rune workers, I should say, and wise folks. But the other ones, especially these here, they demand a certain kind of training. And sometimes they are also just called, should we say, knowledge. Or in a Scandinavian way of saying it, kunnen, eller kunskap. And allow me to just make a little side skip here. And this thing of fjölkunnig, that's one word for it, for such a person, is like the Danish and Swedish words mankundig, eller kunskab, eller kunnen. Can you almost hear how that is connected to the English word cunning? The cunning folks. And what you can also hear that, I think you can, that cunning had, at the time of, should we say, beginning of Viking Age, had a higher status. This kind of knowledge you had in order to be a healer or a wise man or woman had a higher status. It was okay to be cunning because you were kyndig. Right. I should just say that I should say a little more about Galdr, because, as I said, it's a way of using song spells, and it's not like other. We have a lot of fantastic old song tradition in the Nordic countries, and most of them have both, should we say, a social way of being used and a magic way of being used. But Galdr is only for magic. And Galdr also uses both the power of the tune, the melody, strong chanting, but also uses the power of words. And it's always directed at I am galdring at somebody or something in order to change it. And one of our most famous Galdrs, well, I guess it's the one because it's my favorite. It's later called the Merseburger charms or spells. They are actually Galdrs. It's a Galdr number 2. Yeah, and they are for the one, number 1 is for springing out of chains, and the other one is for healing. So Galdr has also its own sort of poetic tradition with a lot of alliterations, and but now I think this is turning into a Galdr workshop. So back to the Seidr. I should also just say about the runes that sometimes it's been hard for scholars to accept that runes were used for magic. And I hope I believe it's in the process of changing. For a lot of modern practitioners, it's quite common to use, should we say, pieces with runes engraved, and you use it for divination, casting lots. And but in the sources that, like in the written sources from some of the older, the mythical poems of what we call a poetic Edda, there's, especially when Odin talks about the way of runes, it's much more for changing things. They're much more like it's things you need to carve them. You need to know how to carve them. You need to know how to sound them. You need to know how to redden them. You need to know how to send them. And you need to know how to delete them. And so they are really like tools. And what I am saying here is that those traditions, each so rich in itself, are not Seidr as I see it. Seidr is, should we say, the way it is remarkable in its ritual structure is that, just to give a brief overview, in Seidr you use song, strong chanting, in order both to call the spirits and changing your own consciousness to move in between the worlds. And you often use a staff. Luckily I have a whole lot of staffs here. A staff like this one. And also you often use a seed. So that's like 3, should we say, tools. And then my claim is also that Seidr is a shamanic discipline, a shamanic way of working. And even though I do realize that discussion is still not come to a conclusion, then my point is that it doesn't really matter so much for me, because through all the many years of, should we say, doing experimental research with trying to figure out how seid works by doing it, we found that if we do it in a shamanic way, it works so well that one should think that seid was made for it. So that's how I will go on with that. I should also say, if I look at Seidr as a shamanic way of working, then it means that that you always have a clear intent. You have a job to do, a task to do, and you can also in the, like when you see descriptions of Seidr in the sagas, there are many of. Then you can always deduct, if it's not said specifically, what the intent is. And so that's one thing, that you have a clear job to do, and that there is a clear ritual, should we say, border between your shamanic work and your everyday life. And that you do the work in cooperation with your spirit allies, either your known spirit guides, the teachers, or the local ones from that area, or what do you call that waterfall, or that stone, that full moon night. So that it's done together with spirits, and that also sort of is tell us that it's done in an enchanted, at least the most, should we say, when we come to the core or the important part of the ritual, then usually you will be in an altered state of awareness. You will be betwixt and between, or enchanted, or whatever you want to call it. So, I have said sometimes that if it's the characteristics of Seidr, sort of as I see it, you could say it's like there's staff, song, seed, and spirits. But I have been warned from one of my good mythologist friends not to make this into an Annette dogma. So it's just like a rule of thumb if you've forgotten what Seid is all about. Now, when I say that Seid is, should we say, has its own characteristics, that doesn't mean that a Galdr can't sneak into a Seid if it's useful in that on that occasion. And in fact, everybody who would be a real wise person skilled in magic, a fjolkunnig, a cunning person, I feel if they are really skilled, and we're going to meet one of them in our next video, they will have a lot of different methods in their tool bag. And so they can, if the job demands it, they can combine the Seidr and Vålva, for example, as we hear about in the mythical poem of the, what is it called in English, the prophecy of the seeress. Or they can combine Galdr and runes, if like trying to assist and help a difficult birth. There is this story in Oddrun, I hope it's pronounced sort of okay, where Oddrun is called to, or is it her? Someone is assisting at a difficult birth, and she both use what is described as biting Galdrs, and she's also cutting or drawing runes on the wrist of the woman giving birth, while she's also calling in the Dizir, goddesses or spirits of healing. And so you can combine it when you know your stuff. If we look at Seidr as a shamanic practice, as one expression of a long line of shamanic traditions, then it also becomes possible to read between the lines, so to speak, or to, with having Seid as the focus, I'm still looking out to a lot of other cultures with shamanic traditions, both in earlier times and now, and learning from, should we say, all the characteristica and all the local specific forms that shamanic traditions take. And from there, it's sort of, I get also a view of Seidr that I will tend to read, for example, the one we're going to look at next time, Thorbjørg Lillevølva's saga. No, not her saga, but her Seidr in Erik the Red's saga. Because then we can sort of fill out the empty holes in the source text with what we know from other places about shamanic practice. So I also want to say that even though Seidr has, as we meet it here, and as our focus of this this program, we will look at Seidr's history as it was there in the Iron and Viking and medieval times in Northern Europe. But still, even if it's specific, I will also say that I view it as part of our shamanic world heritage. It is special, and one thing that makes it special is that in many other traditions you will see that it's not only, as some of you may have learned, that we're using drumming and rattling in order to change our consciousness and to do journey or calling the spirits to us. But there are many traditions that use song, chanting, either wordless or with words, either singing alone or singing in a great group of people. And that is what is enchanting you. So that's not special for Seid. And the staff is also known from many cultures. I can think of both Siberian examples and examples from Middle America. And often the staff will then be also a representative or representing some of your spirit allies, perhaps especially those who are four-legged. And then you can dance with your staff, and then your staffs, then you're four-legged yourself. And also we hear here and there in other traditions that the staff and the shaman, or the wise, cunning person, they get so close. They get so close that one can't live without the other. And so we also see that the shamans, I can think of a Siberian grave, that the shaman had his two horse staffs with him in the grave. So that's not special for Seidr either. Then the seat. What we sit on in the site can be both indoor and it can be outdoor. And I could also do, if I did a site alone for myself, or should we say a site inspired session with my spirits, sometimes I sit here. And I sit on a plain, a chair without the back. I don't use the back. And then I sit here. So we have heard also, and here I think also of Siberian, some very way up north, where there was a special seat for the shaman, and it is made in order to make it different from the ordinary world. And in one case, I remember, is that there needed to be 7 kinds of herbs or trees represented in order to do this distinguishing between the sacred seat and the profane surroundings. So the seat, the magic seat, is not specific for Seidr either. But what is sort of specific for the Norse tradition is that these 3 are used to do together: the seat, the staff, and the song. I haven't found that any place else in the world traditions of shamanism. Some of you have heard about Seidr or other parts of the old Nordic or Norse spiritual tradition or magic tradition, because you have been actually trying to read some of the Icelandic sagas, and some of you have maybe read some of the older or newer research on it. So reading the scholarly points of views of Seidr as it is presented here, as I said earlier, also in the mythical poems of the prose Edda of the poetic Edda, and also in the prose Edda. And see, they are all literary sources that are from early medieval time. Some of them are written in like 1200s and up to 1400s, and they're referring to, or they're describing, they're dealing with things that are happening in the 900s, meaning the 10th century, and later on, or they are dealing with things that are happening in mythological times. But nevertheless, then these descriptions in the saga and telling about how a saga might happen or unfold in the early 11th century, for example, they are the material that the researchers have to look at. And so they become sort of the definition or the description of seidhr, and also leads to some conclusions, for example, or some theories, for example, that seid is not really proper shamanism. The way I see it is that seidhr must have a long, long history. If you look at it as a magic tradition, no magic tradition just came like that. Oh yes, I take that back, because some magic traditions are in fact gotten in a vision quest and given right like that to the one doing it. And I can also here in fact name Odin's getting of both the tryllesange, the Galdrs, and the runes. But if I look at it historically, then shamanic traditions, they evolve, they grow, they degenerate as time goes by, and I think there are some traits in the content of seid practice, especially the power, the way power flows in a seid, the way it can come to you and move through you, and the way it is expressed. It's such a strong. It's such a refined way of working with power, so it must have a good long history. So I see it as my theory, my hypothesis would be that seid, or its first versions were developed probably in Iron Age and in early Iron Age, and somehow also connected to fertility gods or fertility cult, especially because of its, should we say, its refined way of dealing with power, where this power that we can sometimes experience also may have an erotic streak. But that has not been a problem for the early performers of seidhr, because should we say, sexuality and erotic rituals is like mainstream in a society with a fertility religion. Not so when we come to a very different culture in the late Viking Age, the beginning of medieval times. But my point here is that the descriptions we have available to us in the sagas and in the poems are, should we say, snapshots from the very latest years of seidhr. So if you must imagine seidhr having a long, long lifespan of maybe 1,000 years, and then we're just seeing how it was performed in the time where it was actually both unlawful and also not many people knew about it anymore. This is said very symbolically in one of the sagas, that the performer was the last of 9 sisters still, and she was the only one still alive. And it is also said that we hear that the knowledge of the songs is dying out here around year 1000. So when I look at that seidhr would have been older, I'm also more free to be inspired by other shamanic traditions to learn about seidhr. So for me, in my research and my practice and my teaching of Cider the last 30 years, and a lot of other people, we have sort of had the angle to say that we will try to combine a critical study of the sources with an experimental and experiential approach by practicing the site itself. And our aim, or my aim, is not to try to reconstruct the past or do Viking Age Seidr. The aim has been to see what can we learn about the nature of Seidr. How does it work? What does it demand of us, of skills and the way we bear ourselves, the way we walk into the spirit world? And what can it give? What can it add to both our life now and our magic or shamanic practice? And that's what we will be exploring by a critical study of the sources. Over the years, I have received many letters from people who are living in other parts of the world than Scandinavia, and who really has approached me because they wanted to study Seid, and they also wanted to learn to study it with me. And when they describe also their motivation, for some of them, and that probably means some of you seeing this, is that your family line came from the Nordic countries, and this in fact of practicing a Nordic, or should we say a tradition that's rooted in both the Nordic landscape and the Nordic spirit tradition, both is for you in a way of reconnecting with your ancestors and in a spiritual ancestry. And for some of you, it also, one of the motivations has been that this way of working with the seidr is also pretty nature connected. We will get a lot back to that, but meaning that you can also practice this kind of shamanic tradition in nature that doesn't have to borrow from other cultures, spiritual and magic traditions, who are maybe not that happy about you borrowing their legacy. So that's some good arguments, but we will be looking at both history in this project here, but a lot also to what is timeless. What is it that we can learn in the ritual performing of Seidr that we can do any place and any time? And for me, then nature is that common denominator, this thing that we can go, should we say, below the cultural filter and go to the earth and the moon and the ash tree and everything that is there as it was 1,000 years ago. So we can go to an authentic source. The thing is, when I said I'm not going to reconstruct or to aim at reconstructing a saga Seidr or a Viking Age, is also I might present a challenge to some of you, all of us, because it's an exercise, and we will come to it in one of the later videos, in number, I don't know, 5 or 6 or something, about looking our Viking in the eye, or looking the Vølva in the side performer in the eye. This thing of what is it that we have of romantic projections on everything Viking, everything Norse. And I say this with compassion, because I know that such a longing can be a true longing of the soul, of the heart, for connection. And so I just want that we look these things in the eye, and maybe explore our own longings, our own projections. Yeah. So that we can really practice this authentically and ultimately plant our staff in our own turf, so to speak. There's in my research, my practice, my teaching, I have a few, I don't know, can you call them teaching lines or mantras or whatever. And one is, in fact, a quote that was, it was said it came from Gustav Mahler, and later I found out that that's not true. But anyway, it's a good quote. And it says something like this: tradition is the keeping of the fire, not the worship of the ashes. And that also, should we say, it just pinpoints our way of working here. That sometimes the ashes is all that we have, and then we'll have to blow new life in the embers and follow the fire, keeping the fire. And I also have another saying, something that burst out of me once spontaneously, and whenever I tried to forget it later, then my spirit allies have always come shouting at me again. This here, in my dealings with Seidr, both practice and teaching, they say, keep it simple, keep it shamanic, keep it close to nature. And this is some of the things I will try to keep repeating to myself and maybe to us when we go further on in it. And so, I think this was our first lecture, our first session in the Magic University of Seidr. Thank you for now.